Mike Reynolds is just a small-town mechanic at Riverside Airport, making ends meet by fixing everything from rusty tractors to old crop dusters. His life changes forever when a luxurious private jet worth $65 million makes an emergency landing. Despite having never worked on such an expensive aircraft, Mike takes on the challenge. Using his years of experience and natural talent, he manages to repair the jet perfectly. 3 days later, a beautiful woman arrives in the same jet, seeking the mechanic who fixed her plane. But she's not just there to say thank you. Could this chance encounter between a humble mechanic and a wealthy jet owner turn into the most unexpected love story of the year? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The worn red toolbox sat in its usual spot by the hangar door, its scratched surface catching the first rays of dawn. Mike Reynolds ran his calloused fingers over the embossed nameplate. James Reynolds, aircraft mechanic, 1975-2010. Every morning for the past 5 years, since inheriting his father's position at Riverside Municipal Airport, Mike had started his day the same way, touching that nameplate for luck. Today was no different, except it was. The morning air carried an unusual crispness, and the sky held that particular shade of perfect blue that pilots call severe clear. Mike hadn't known then that this ordinary Tuesday would change everything. "Morning, boss," Tom Garcia's cheerful voice echoed across the hangar. Tom had been the airport's ground crew chief for longer than Mike had been alive, and he still managed to sound like every day was Christmas morning. "Coffee's fresh?" Mike smiled, grabbing his father's old thermos. And from the toolbox, "You're a lifesaver, Tom. Any interesting flights on the schedule?" "Just the usual. Couple of crop dusters heading out early. That retired dentist with his Cessna doing touch and goes, and Miller's charter service has 3 flights booked." Tom handed Mike a slightly crumpled printout of the day's flight schedule. The hangar smelled of oil, coffee, and possibility, the same way it had when Mike was a kid, watching his father work. He'd learned everything he knew about aircraft maintenance in this very space, starting with the basics of changing oil and working his way up to complete engine overhauls. Mike's workshop occupied the far corner of the hangar, a space that hadn't changed much since his father's time. The walls were lined with meticulously organized tools, each one hanging in its designated spot. Photographs of various aircraft his father had worked on over the years covered any remaining wall space, along with his certification papers and a few faded family photos. "Hey, Mike," Tom called out, his voice carrying a note of concern. "You heard anything about that developer looking to buy up small airports in the region?" Mike shook his head, focusing on organizing his tools for the day ahead. "Nothing concrete, just rumors so far." "Why?" "Overheard something on the radio this morning. Some big corporation's been acquiring private airfields, turning them into those fancy executive airports." Tom's weathered face creased with worry. "You know, the kind with marble floors in the terminal and fancy coffee shops." "Riverside's not exactly prime real estate for that sort of thing," Mike replied, though the thought had crossed his mind more than once. The airport's finances weren't great, but they managed to keep the lights on and the runway maintained. Most days, that felt like enough. He was about to say more when the radio crackled to life. The voice that came through was calm, but carried an unmistakable edge of urgency. "Riverside traffic, Gulfstream, November 650 Alpha Charlie, 20 miles west, declaring an emergency. Experiencing electrical system failures. Request immediate landing clearance." Mike and Tom exchanged glances. A Gulfstream at their small airport was unusual enough. A Gulfstream declaring an emergency was unprecedented. Tom was already moving toward the radio. "November 650 Alpha Charlie, Riverside traffic, cleared to land runway 31. Winds calm, altimeter 30.02. Emergency services will be standing by." Mike reached for his toolbox, his father's lessons echoing in his mind. Every emergency landing is an opportunity to save lives. The rest is just details. The red box felt heavier than usual as he carried it toward the hangar doors, ready to face whatever challenge was about to land on their runway. The morning sun caught the metal of his father's old wrenches through the open lid of the toolbox. These tools had fixed everything from crop dusters to vintage warbirds, but never anything as sophisticated as a modern Gulfstream. Mike took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. Sometimes the biggest opportunities in life arrive dressed as emergencies. The distant whine of jet engines grew louder, and Mike could see the sleek shape of the aircraft on final approach. Whatever was wrong with that plane, he knew his life was about to change. He just didn't know how much. The Gulfstream G650 appeared out of the morning sun like a silver arrow, its approach steeper than normal but controlled. Mike watched through narrowed eyes as the aircraft descended, noting how the landing lights weren't blinking, a clear sign of electrical problems. The jet's engines growled rather than whined, suggesting the pilot was flying with reduced computer assistance. Tom had already called the local fire department, and their single crash truck was positioned near the runway. More a gesture of preparedness than actual protection for an aircraft of this size. Mike gripped his father's toolbox tighter, mentally, reviewing everything he knew about Gulfstream electrical systems. The touchdown was perfect despite the emergency, the mark of an experienced pilot. As the jet taxied toward the hangar, Mike could see the cockpit instruments flickering through the windscreen. The aircraft rolled to a stop, and for a moment, everything was silent, except for the ticking of cooling metal. The main cabin door opened smoothly, and a man in a crisp pilot's uniform emerged. He was tall, middle-aged, with the kind of confident bearing that came from thousands of hours in. "The air, James Henderson," he called out as he descended the airstairs. "And you are?" "Mike Reynolds, lead mechanic." Mike stepped forward, conscious of his oil-stained coveralls next to the pilot's immaculate uniform. "Can you tell me what happened?" "Up there," Henderson ran a hand through his silver hair. "Started with intermittent warnings about the electrical bus, then cascaded from there. By the end we were losing systems one by one." He reached into his flight bag and pulled out a thick manual bound in blue leather. "Here's the maintenance documentation. Latest revision might help you diagnose the issue." Mike took the manual, its pristine pages a stark contrast to his greasy hands. This wasn't the photocopied maintenance guide he used for the crop dusters. This was a technical document worth thousands of dollars, detailing every system of one of the most sophisticated private aircraft in the world. "Who's the owner?" Mike asked, already flipping through the manual's electrical diagrams. "Ms. Carter prefers discretion," Henderson replied smoothly. "But she's authorized full repairs, whatever it takes. She needs the aircraft operational within 3 days. Mike looked up sharply. 3 days for a full electrical diagnostic and repair on a G650. He gestured at his modest workshop. "This isn't exactly a Gulfstream service center." Henderson's expression remained neutral. "Ms. Carter was quite specific. She's willing to pay premium rates, of course, and she's been informed of your limitations, but your reputation with complex electrical systems preceded you. Apparently, that incident with the vintage P-51 Mustang made quite an impression in certain circles." Mike remembered that repair, a complete rewiring of a World War II fighter aircraft that other mechanics had declared hopeless. It had taken weeks of careful work, but he'd restored it to flying condition. Still, a P-51's electrical system was like a bicycle compared to the spacecraft-level complexity of a G650. He opened the manual to the system's overview, and his breath caught. The diagrams were beautiful in their complexity, a symphony of interconnected systems, each one a puzzle waiting to be solved. Despite his reservations, Mike felt the familiar surge of excitement that came with a real technical challenge. "I'll need to do a full inspection before I can promise anything," he said finally. Henderson nodded, pulling out a business card. That's fair. My number's on there. I'll be staying in town until the repairs are complete." He paused, then added with a slight smile, "Ms. Carter mentioned that if anyone could fix it in 3 days, it would be the mechanic who once got a lightning-struck crop duster back in the air in less than 24 hours. As Henderson walked away to arrange ground transportation, Mike stood in the shadow of the massive aircraft, the manual heavy in his hands. The morning sun glinted off the Gulf Stream's polished surface, and he could see his reflection, distorted in the curved fuselage. A small-town mechanic dwarfed by a machine that cost more money than he would see in 10 lifetimes. "Well, Dad," he muttered, touching the toolbox at his feet, "looks like we've got our work cut out for us this time." Mike spent the next hour poring over the Gulfstream's manual, his coffee growing cold beside him. The technical complexities made his head spin. 5 independent electrical buses, triple redundant systems, and computer controls that made the space shuttle look primitive. Each page revealed another layer of sophistication he'd need to master. "You've got that look," Tom said, settling into a chair beside Mike's workbench. "The same one your father had when someone told him something." "It couldn't be fixed." Mike glanced up from a particularly complex diagram. "Dad never worked on anything like this, Tom. This isn't just fixing a broken wire or replacing a faulty component. One wrong move and I could fry systems worth millions." "James Reynolds might not have worked on Gulfstreams," Tom agreed, "but he taught you something more important than technical specs. He taught you how to think about problems." The memory hit Mike with unexpected force. A hot summer day 15 years ago, his father kneeling beside a broken-down Cessna, teaching him to diagnose engine problems by sound and touch. "Start with what you know," his father had said, guiding Mike's young hands over the engine. "Every problem tells a story. Your job is to listen to it." Mike pulled out a fresh diagnostic worksheet, the kind he used for complex repairs. His father had designed the format years ago, a methodical approach to breaking down even the most daunting mechanical challenges into manageable pieces. At the top, he wrote, "G650 Electrical System Diagnostic Report." Below that, he began, listing what he knew: intermittent warnings, cascading failures, systems shutting down sequentially rather than simultaneously. The patterns started to emerge as he wrote. Tom watched over his shoulder. "Looks like you're taking it on, then." "If I don't, they'll have to ferry in a mechanic from the closest service center. That's at least a day lost right there." Mike sketched a quick diagram. "Besides, the failure pattern suggests something systematic. See how the problems propagated through the electrical bus? That's not random component failure." He stood up and walked to the Gulfstream, placing his hand on its cool metal skin. The aircraft hulked in the hangar like a sleeping giant, its sophisticated systems waiting to be understood. Mike remembered another of his father's lessons. Every machine, no matter how complex, is built by human hands. That means human hands can fix it. The next few hours were a blur of systematic testing. Mike used his old multimeter alongside. The jet's built-in diagnostic system, cross-referencing readings with the manual's specifications. He crawled through access panels, traced wiring routes, and gradually built a complete picture of the aircraft's electrical nervous system. By late afternoon, his diagnostic report had grown to several pages of detailed notes, diagrams, and test results. The problem was challenging but not impossible, a cascade of events triggered by a failing power distribution unit. The unit itself was fine, but its control software had become corrupted, causing it to mismanage power flow through the aircraft's systems. "Got it," Mike announced, circling a section of his report. "The hardware's good, but the software's corrupted. We'll need to reload the firmware and recalibrate the entire electrical system." Tom whistled. "Can you handle that kind of programming?" Mike thought of the coding classes he'd taken at the community college, preparing for a future where aircraft were more computer than machine. "Yeah, I can handle it. But I'll need to call in some favors to get the right equipment." He reached for his phone, then paused, his hand hovering over the keypad. Taking on this job meant more than just fixing an airplane. It meant putting his reputation and possibly his future on the line. A memory surfaced. His father standing in this same hangar, teaching him to trust his instincts. Sometimes the biggest risks bring the biggest rewards, son. The trick is knowing which risks are worth taking. Mike picked up the phone and dialed Henderson's number. When the pilot answered, Mike's voice was steady. "I've completed the diagnostic. I can fix it, but I'll need some specialized equipment. And complete access to the aircraft's software systems." There was a pause on the other end. "You're certain about the diagnosis?" Mike looked at his detailed report, at the careful documentation of every test and observation. "Yes, I'm certain. 3 days is tight, but I can do it." "Very well," Henderson replied. "I'll inform Ms. Carter. Whatever you need will be provided. I'll have the software access code sent over immediately." After hanging up, Mike sat back and let out a long breath. The diagnostic report sat before him, representing both a puzzle solved and a challenge accepted. He'd just committed himself to fixing an aircraft worth more than his entire life's earnings, armed with nothing but his skills, his father's tools, and a determination that would make James Reynolds proud. The sun had long since set when Mike finally noticed the time. His coffee-stained notebook was filled with dozens of pages of meticulous notes, sketches, and calculations. He'd developed the habit of documenting everything years ago. Another lesson from his father. Memory fades, son, but ink doesn't lie. The hangar was quiet except for the soft hum of his laptop running diagnostics on the Gulfstream systems. Tom had left hours ago, though not before making sure Mike had enough. Coffee and sandwiches to last the night. The old notebook's pages crinkled as Mike reviewed his progress, each entry telling the story of the evening's work. 15 p.m. Initial software diagnostic complete. Primary power distribution unit showing multiple corrupted sectors. Backup systems unaffected but locked out. 30 p.m. Received access codes from Henderson. Beginning system reset sequence. Note: document every step. No room for errors. 45 p.m. First attempt at firmware reload failed. Error code suggests compatibility issue with latest update. His phone buzzed. A text from Henderson. Ms. Carter, requesting progress update. Mike looked at the jet looming in the dim hangar lights, then down at his notebook. The coffee rings on the pages marked the passing hours like timestamps, each stain a reminder of another challenge faced. Making progress. He texted back. Identified software corruption in power distribution unit, working on firmware solution. The response came quickly. Ms. Carter appreciates your dedication. She's arranged for additional equipment to arrive tomorrow morning. Mike ran his hand over his tired eyes. The notebook entries were becoming harder to read as fatigue set in, but he couldn't stop now. He'd discovered something interesting in the aircraft's maintenance logs, a pattern that might explain the cascade failure. 30 p.m. Theory: recent software update conflicting with custom power management protocols. Need to check previous version numbers. The night deepened around him as he worked, the hangar's shadows growing longer. His father's voice echoed in his memory. The night shift is when you really learn what an aircraft is trying to tell you. Everything's quieter, clearer. Mike flipped to a fresh page in his notebook, drawing a detailed flowchart of the power distribution system. The solution was there, hidden in the complexity of interacting systems. His pencil moved across the paper, connecting components, tracing electrical paths, revealing the underlying pattern. 15 a.m. Breakthrough. Custom power management software installed for specific flight profiles. Standard update disrupted calibration. Need to rebuild from backup and merge protocols. His phone buzzed again. This time it was Tom. "Get some sleep, kid. Can't fix a plane if you can't see straight." Mike smiled, adding another note to his growing collection. "EM, Tom's right. Better to start fresh. Key tasks for tomorrow. Install new diagnostic equipment, restore backup software, merge custom protocols, begin recalibration sequence." He closed the notebook, its pages now a roadmap of the night's journey through the jets. Complex systems, The coffee stains, hurried sketches, and detailed notes told the story not just of a mechanical problem, but of a mechanic pushing his limits to solve it. Standing in the quiet hangar, Mike felt a strange connection to the aircraft. Like him, it was more than it appeared on the surface. Behind its luxury exterior lay sophisticated systems that required understanding, patience, and respect to maintain. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight he'd made real progress. He gathered his tools, carefully returning each one to its proper place in his father's toolbox. The notebook went into his back pocket, a habit unchanged since his apprentice days. As he locked up the hangar, Mike took one last look at the Gulf Stream. Its polished surface reflected the security lights, making it glow like some otherworldly visitor. In just a few days, this aircraft would either prove his abilities or break his reputation. But for now, in the peaceful dark of the airport night, it was just another machine waiting to be healed. He patted the notebook in his pocket, feeling the weight of its coffee-stained pages. Tomorrow would come soon enough, bringing with it new problems to solve and solutions to discover. For now, he had a plan, and in his experience, that was half the battle. The new diagnostic equipment arrived at dawn, sleek black cases containing tools worth more than Mike's annual income. But it was the circuit board in his hands that commanded his attention. Hidden behind 3 access panels and protected by a titanium housing, the damaged component told a story he hadn't expected. "This isn't just corruption," Mike muttered, examining the board under his magnifying lamp. "Something caused this damage." Tom leaned in for a closer look. "Lightning strike?" "No." Mike traced the hairline fractures in the circuit pathways. "This is stress damage. Like the board was running hot for a long time." He set it carefully on his workbench, next to the new replacement unit that had arrived with the diagnostic gear. His phone chirped. Another message from Henderson. "Ms. Carter requesting video call in 15 minutes to discuss progress." Mike looked down at his oil-stained coveralls and ran a hand through his disheveled hair. Perfect timing. The call came through on a secure laptop provided with the diagnostic equipment. Mike had expected to see Henderson, but instead found himself facing a series of corporate executives in expensive suits. In the center of the screen sat a woman he assumed must be Miss Carter, though he could only see her silhouette against a bright window. "Mr. Reynolds." Her voice was clear and authoritative. "I understand you've discovered additional complications." Mike held up the damaged circuit board. "Yes, ma'am. The power distribution unit shows signs of physical stress. This goes beyond software corruption. Something's been pushing these systems beyond their designed limits." There was a moment of silence on the call. One of the executives leaned forward. "Are you suggesting operator error, Mr. Reynolds?" "No, sir. I'm suggesting someone modified these systems to perform beyond specifications. The custom software we found, it wasn't just for power management. Someone's been overclocking these systems." The silhouetted figure of Ms. Carter shifted slightly. "Explain in layman's terms, please." Mike chose his words carefully. "It's like someone tuned a family sedan to run like a race car. It works for a while, but eventually things start breaking. Whoever modified this jet, they knew what they were doing, but they were pushing the equipment too hard. Can you fix it?" Ms. Carter's question was direct. "Yes, but not by just replacing parts and resetting software. We need to understand why these modifications were made in the first place. Otherwise, we risk the same problems happening again." Another executive spoke up. "That information is classified, Mr. Reynolds. Just fix the aircraft to factory specifications." Mike stood his ground. "With respect, sir, if we don't address the underlying issue, you'll be back here in a month with worse problems. These modifications were made for a reason. I need to know what that reason was to ensure a proper repair." The room on the video call fell silent. Finally, Ms. Carter spoke again. "Everyone out. I need to speak with Mr. Reynolds privately." Mike watched as the executives filed out of view, When they were gone, Miss Carter moved closer to the camera, finally revealing her face. She was younger than he'd expected, perhaps in her late 30s, with sharp features and intelligent eyes. The modifications were made to accommodate high-altitude research flights, she said quietly. We've been conducting atmospheric studies that require unusual flight profiles. The standard systems weren't adequate. Mike nodded, pieces clicking into place. That explains the custom power management. You needed extra juice for research equipment while flying at the edge of the envelope. Can you make it work safely? He looked at the damaged board again. Yes, but not in 3 days. Doing this right will take at least 5. You have 4, she replied, a slight smile touching her lips. And Mr. Reynolds, thank you for your integrity. Not many would have questioned those executives. After the call ended, Mike sat staring at the circuit board. 4 days to not just fix the jet, but redesign its systems to safely do what they'd been trying to force it to do. Part of him wanted to walk away. This was way beyond routine maintenance. But another part of him, the part that had learned at his father's knee that every problem was just a solution waiting to be found, was already sketching ideas in his notebook. "What do you think, Tom?" he asked, not looking up from his drawings. The old ground chief chuckled. "I think your father would say you're either crazy or brilliant." Probably both. Mike picked up the damaged circuit board, studying its intricate pathways. "Well, Dad always said the best mechanics are a little bit of both." Mike had been staring at the same circuit diagram for 2 hours when he noticed the photograph. It had fallen from his father's toolbox, a creased, faded image of James Reynolds working on an old military aircraft. The plane's panels were open, exposing complex wiring that his father was studying with intense concentration. The sight triggered a memory. "Sometimes you have to step back to see the whole picture, son. Get too close and you miss the pattern." Mike pushed away from his workbench and walked to the other end of the hangar, turning to view the Gulf Stream from a distance. The morning sun, streaming through the windows, cast long shadows across the aircraft's sleek form. "What am I missing?" he muttered, pulling out his phone to review the high-altitude flight data Ms. Carter had reluctantly shared. The numbers told a story. Research flights pushing the aircraft to 51,000 feet, holding pattern times far beyond normal operations. Unusual power demands from unspecified equipment. He glanced back at his father's photo. James Reynolds had been working on a high-altitude reconnaissance aircraft in that image, one designed to operate at the edge of the atmosphere. The solution hit Mike like a thunderbolt. "Tom," he called out, rushing back to his workbench. "I need you to look at something." The ground chief appeared moments later, wiping grease from his hands. "Got something?" Mike was already sketching frantically in his notebook. "We've been thinking about this backward. We don't need to modify the electrical system to handle more power. We need to redesign how it manages the power it already has." He grabbed the damaged circuit board. "Look at these stress patterns. They're not from too much power flowing through the system. They're from the power being redirected too abruptly." His pencil flew across the paper, drawing a new configuration. "If we create a buffering system, something to smooth out the power transitions," Tom studied the sketch. "Like a surge protector? More like a power reservoir. The aircraft already has excess generating capacity. We just need to store it more efficiently and distribute it more smoothly." Mike held up his father's photograph. "Dad worked on a plane that had the same problem. They solved it by treating the electrical system like a water management system, storing energy in capacitor banks and releasing it gradually." He spent the next hour outlining the modification plan, periodically glancing at his father's photograph for inspiration. The solution wasn't just about fixing what was broken. It was about rethinking how the entire system worked. When Henderson called for the afternoon update, Mike was ready. "I need to speak with Ms. Carter directly." Minutes later, her face appeared on the secure laptop. "Mr. Reynolds, you have news." "I have a solution," he said, holding up his designs. "But it's not conventional. We'll need to modify the power distribution architecture significantly." Her eyes narrowed. "The board won't approve experimental modifications." "This isn't experimental. It's based on proven technology from high-altitude military aircraft. My father worked on the original design." He held up the photograph. "The principles are the same. We're just applying them to modern systems." There was a long pause as Ms. Carter studied him through the screen. "And you're certain this will work?" "Yes, but I'll need authorization to modify the aircraft's power management software, and we'll need to fabricate some custom components." She nodded slowly. "I'll have Henderson send you the authorization codes, but Mr. Reynolds—" Her expression softened slightly. "Thank you for finding a real solution, not just a quick fix." After the call ended, Mike sat looking at his father's photograph. The similarities were striking. Both of them hunched over complex systems, seeking solutions that others might have missed. He carefully returned the photo to its place in the toolbox, but left it visible as a reminder. Tom appeared with fresh coffee. "Your old man would be proud, you know. This is exactly the kind of problem-solving he was known for." Mike picked up his tools, ready to begin implementing his solution. He always said the best fixes come from understanding the problem, not just the symptoms. The morning light caught the Gulf Stream's surface, and for the first time since it had landed, Mike felt certain he could deliver what he'd promised. The aircraft's sophisticated systems no longer seemed like an insurmountable challenge, but rather a puzzle waiting to be solved, just like the ones his father had taught him to tackle, one piece at a time. The receipt lay on Mike's workbench, like a lottery ticket in reverse. Numbers so large they seemed unreal. Custom components rushed from specialists across the country, overnight shipping charges that could have paid his rent for months. Specialized. Tools he'd probably never use again. At the bottom, a single line. "Authorized by A. Carter." "You shouldn't keep looking at that," Tom said, setting down another cup of coffee. "It'll give you heartburn." Mike nodded, but couldn't help doing the math again. The total cost of parts and equipment was more than he'd earn in 5 years. "If this doesn't work, it'll work," Tom interrupted. "Now stop worrying about the money and focus on the job." The past 36 hours had been a blur of intense concentration and precise work. Mike had installed the new power management system piece by piece, testing each connection before moving to the next. The custom components had arrived in sealed containers marked with security clearance levels he didn't know existed for civilian aircraft. His modifications were coming together exactly as planned. The new power reservoir system was elegant in its simplicity, using military-grade capacitors to store and distribute energy more efficiently than the original design. Each component had been carefully calibrated to handle the extreme conditions of high-altitude research flights. Henderson had been watching the progress closely, sending hourly updates to Ms. Carter. The pilot's initial skepticism had gradually transformed into cautious admiration as he witnessed Mike's methodical approach to the rebuild. "Ms. Carter wants to know if we're still on schedule," Henderson said, approaching the workbench. Mike checked his watch. "Final system integration in 2 hours. Full testing by midnight. We'll be ready for her arrival tomorrow morning." The pilot nodded, looking at the scattered components and tools. "I've never seen modifications like this before." "That's because most people try to force more power through the system," Mike explained, reaching for a specialized calibration tool. "We're teaching the system to use its power more intelligently." The next 2 hours passed in focused silence as Mike completed the final connections. Each wire, each circuit, each line of code had to be perfect. The receipt's astronomical figures kept flashing in his mind, but he pushed them aside, concentrating instead on his father's voice. "Quality isn't about the cost of the parts, it's about the care in putting them together." As midnight approached, Mike initiated the final diagnostic sequence. The aircraft's systems came online one by one, each one reporting optimal performance. The power distribution readings were better than factory specifications, with the new reservoir system providing an extra margin of safety for high-altitude operations. "It's done," Mike announced, watching the final test results scroll across his screen. All systems green, power efficiency increased by 23%. Henderson immediately pulled out his phone to call Ms. Carter. Mike barely heard the conversation, his attention fixed on the diagnostic readings. Every number was perfect, every system synchronized. He had done more than fix the aircraft, he had made it better. Tom appeared with a broom, beginning his end-of-day routine. "You know what this means, don't you?" Mike looked up. "That we finished ahead of schedule. That you just proved you can work on any aircraft in the world." Tom gestured at the receipt. "Those numbers, they're not a burden, they're proof that you belong in the big leagues." Mike carefully folded the receipt and tucked it into his father's toolbox. Tomorrow, Ms. Carter would arrive to inspect their work. The astronomical figures on that piece of paper represented not just parts and labor, but trust. Trust that a small-town mechanic could solve a problem that had stumped the experts. As he began cleaning his tools, Mike felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with money. He had taken on the biggest challenge of his career and succeeded, not by following the manual, but by applying the principles his father had taught him. Understand the problem, trust your instincts, and never be afraid to find a better way. The Gulf Stream stood quietly in the hangar, its systems humming with new efficiency, ready for whatever tests Ms. Carter would demand tomorrow. Mike had done his part. Now he just had to wait and see what tomorrow would bring. Dawn painted the sky in shades of rose and gold as the sleek black Tesla pulled onto the airport grounds. Mike had been up for hours, triple-checking systems and polishing already immaculate tools. He'd even put on a clean pair of coveralls, though they still bore the faded patch with his father's name. The car stopped outside the hangar, and Alexandra Carter stepped out. She moved with the fluid grace of someone accustomed to command, her charcoal suit perfectly tailored, her dark hair swept into an elegant knot. A silk scarf in deep burgundy provided the only splash of color in her ensemble. Mike straightened as she approached, suddenly conscious of every oil stain and scuff mark in his workspace. Her presence seemed to transform the humble hangar into somewhere more significant. "Mr. Reynolds." Her voice carried the same authority it had over video, but with an added warmth he hadn't expected. "I hope you don't mind an early arrival. I'm eager to see your work." "Of course, Ms. Carter. We're ready for the full demonstration." She smiled slightly. "Alexandra, please. After all, you've rebuilt my favorite aircraft from the inside out." For the next hour, Mike guided her through every modification, every improvement, every careful calibration. She asked surprisingly technical questions, revealing an understanding of aircraft systems that went far beyond that of a typical owner. "The power reservoir system," she said, examining the diagnostic readings. "It's brilliant in its simplicity. Reminds me of solutions we used in spacecraft design." Mike looked up sharply. "Spacecraft? Did Henderson not mention it?" "Before starting my research company, I was an aerospace engineer for NASA." She traced a finger along one of his diagrams. "That's why I knew you were the right person for this job. Your reputation for unconventional solutions preceded you." She unwound her scarf as they worked, draping it over a nearby chair. The silk caught the morning light, its deep color standing out against the industrial surroundings like a rose in a machine shop. "The high-altitude research," Mike ventured. "You're studying atmospheric composition." Alexandra's eyes sparkled with interest. "Among other things, climate change is creating phenomena we don't fully understand. Our modified aircraft allow us to gather data at altitudes normally reserved for military planes." She moved to the cockpit, reviewing the new power management interfaces. Her questions were precise, focused on safety margins and failure scenarios. Mike found himself repeatedly impressed by her technical acumen. "You're not just an owner who flies," he observed. "You're a pilot who owns. Life's too short to let others do all the interesting things." She smiled again, and this time it reached her eyes. "I believe in understanding the tools I use. Speaking of which," she retrieved a tablet from her briefcase and pulled up a series of graphs. "These are the power demand curves from our most challenging flight profiles. I'd like to see how your modifications handle them." For the next 2 hours, they ran simulation after simulation. The new systems performed flawlessly, maintaining stable power levels even under the most extreme conditions. Alexandra's initial professional interest gradually transformed into genuine excitement. "This is remarkable," she said finally, setting down her tablet. "You haven't just fixed the problem. You've given us capabilities we didn't have before." Mike felt a surge of pride, quickly followed by uncertainty. The project was complete. Soon she would fly away in her improved aircraft, and he would return to fixing crop dusters and small private planes. "I should get my team in here to prepare for departure," she said, reaching for her scarf. As she lifted it, a business card fell from its folds. Mike bent to retrieve it, noticing the NASA logo in one corner before handing it back. Their fingers brushed briefly in the exchange, and something electric passed between them. A recognition of shared passion for engineering excellence, for solving the impossible puzzles. "You know," Alexandra said softly, "we're always looking for talented engineers who can think outside the box. People who see solutions, where others see only problems." Before Mike could respond, Tom burst into the hangar. "Mike, you need to see this." He was waving a newspaper, his face flushed with excitement or concern. Mike couldn't tell which. Alexandra's scarf slipped from her grasp, floating to the floor like a splash of burgundy wine. The moment broken, they both turned to Tom, unaware that their lives were about to become far more complicated than either had imagined. Tom thrust the newspaper into Mike's hands. The headline jumped out immediately. "Carter Aerospace announces revolutionary high-altitude research program." Below it was a photo of their airport, taken from above. "They're buying small airports," Tom said breathlessly, "creating a network of research stations across the country, and Riverside is on their list." Mike looked at Alexandra, who had retrieved her scarf, and was watching the scene with careful neutrality. "Is this true?" She nodded slowly. "That was supposed to be announced next week. Someone leaked it early." She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a bottle of champagne. "I was planning to discuss this after the test flights, but since the cat's out of the bag..." The bottle was vintage Dom Perignon, its label bearing the same deep burgundy color as her scarf. She set it on Mike's workbench next to his father's old toolbox. Luxury and legacy side by side. "Riverside Airport isn't just on our list," she said. "It's the centerpiece of the program. Your work on the Gulf Stream proved what I suspected when I first heard about this place, that sometimes the best talent isn't found in fancy corporate hangars." Mike's mind raced. The emergency landing. It wasn't really an emergency, was it? Alexandra smiled. "The electrical problems were real enough. But yes, I chose to land here. I needed to see firsthand how you would handle a complex problem with limited resources." She gestured at the aircraft. "You exceeded every expectation." "So what exactly are you proposing?" Mike asked, still trying to process everything. Alexandra straightened, shifting into what he was beginning to recognize as her business posture. "I'm proposing a partnership. Carter Aerospace will acquire Riverside Airport, but not to shut it down or turn it into some soulless corporate facility. We want to transform it into our primary research and development center." She began to pace, her enthusiasm breaking through her professional demeanor. "Think about it. You've already proven you can modify aircraft for high-altitude research. Imagine what you could do with proper funding and resources. We'll maintain the current operations, the crop dusters, the flight school, all of it. But we'll add a research division, with you as chief engineer." Mike stood frozen, the newspaper still in his hands. Tom had collapsed into a chair, looking shell-shocked. "Me?" Mike managed. "Chief engineer? Who better?" Alexandra stopped, pacing, and faced him directly. You solved in 3 days what our corporate engineers couldn't figure out in 3 months. You improvised solutions that our best minds hadn't considered. And most importantly, you understand that sometimes the old ways and the new need to work together. She picked up the champagne bottle. So, Mr. Reynolds, what do you say? Will you marry your extraordinary talents to our vision for the future? The hangar fell silent except for the distant sound of a crop duster taking off. Mike looked around at his father's tools, at the aircraft he'd just rebuilt, at Tom's hopeful face, and finally at Alexandra Carter, brilliant, beautiful, and offering him everything he'd never dared to dream of. The current staff, he asked, they all keep their jobs? Every single one, she confirmed, with raises and improved benefits. This isn't a corporate takeover, Mike, it's an evolution. He picked up his father's old toolbox, feeling its familiar weight. Dad always said opportunities come disguised as challenges. Smart man, Alexandra said softly. I wish I could have met him. Mike set down the toolbox and extended his hand. Then yes to all of it. Alexandra's face lit up with genuine joy. She grabbed the champagne bottle and handed it to Tom. Would you do the honors? The pop of the cork echoed through the hangar like a starting gun. Tom found some old coffee mugs, and Alexandra didn't hesitate to pour the expensive champagne into the humble containers. To the future of Riverside research and development, she toasted, raising her mug. To solving the impossible, Mike added, thinking of his father. To both of you, Tom said, his voice thick with emotion. And to whoever leaked that story a week early. They all laughed, and as Mike sipped the finest champagne he'd ever tasted from a coffee mug that had seen better days, he realized that sometimes the best proposals aren't just about business or romance. They're about finding someone who sees the same possibilities you do. The Riverside Gazette's front page screamed, "Local airport to become high-tech research hub." Below the headline, a photographer had caught Mike and Alexandra shaking hands in front of the Gulf Stream, the morning sun creating a halo effect around them. The article painted a romantic picture. Small-town mechanic impresses tech mogul, transforming both their futures. Mike tossed the paper onto his workbench, where it landed next to a stack of others. Every local publication had picked up the story, each one adding their own spin. Some focused on the economic impact, others on the unlikely partnership, and a few tabloids had even suggested a budding romance. You're going to have to talk to them eventually, Tom said, gesturing at the small crowd of reporters gathered. Outside the hangar, they'd been there since dawn, hoping to get more details about the Carter Aerospace acquisition. I fix planes, Mike muttered. I don't give interviews. His phone buzzed. Another message from Alexandra. She'd flown out last night to handle the corporate side of the announcement, leaving him to deal with the local fallout. Her text was characteristically direct. Press conference tomorrow, wear something nice, and stop hiding in the hangar. The past 24 hours had been a blur. After the champagne toast, reality had crashed in like a thunderstorm. Lawyers had appeared with contracts. Corporate representatives had toured the facility. Someone from HR had started talking about benefit packages and stock options. Mike picked up one of the newspapers, reading the quote they'd attributed to him. This partnership represents the perfect blend of traditional aviation expertise and cutting-edge aerospace research. He couldn't remember saying anything of the sort. Your father would have loved this, Tom said, settling into his usual chair. He always said you were meant for bigger things than crop dusters. But what if I mess it up? Mike finally voiced the fear that had been growing since yesterday. Running a research division, managing teams, dealing with corporate politics. That's not what I do. No, came a familiar voice from the hangar door. What you do is solve impossible problems. Alexandra stood there, looking somehow even more elegant than yesterday in a navy business suit. She strode in, dropping a thick folder on Mike's workbench. I thought you were in New York, Mike said, surprised. I was, but I realized something during the board meeting. She spread out several documents from the folder. You're not the only one stepping into unfamiliar territory. The papers were covered in her handwritten notes, questions about airport operations, maintenance schedules, local aviation needs. She'd done her homework, just as meticulously as he'd studied the Gulf Stream systems. I know how to run a tech company, she continued. I know aerospace engineering and corporate strategy. But this, she gestured around the hangar, this is a community. These people trust you, not some corporate mission statement. Mike picked up the newspaper again, really looking at the photo this time. They did make an odd pair, him in his work coveralls, her in designer business wear. But there was something right about the image too, like two pieces of different puzzles that somehow fit together. So what's the plan? He asked. First we do this press conference. Together. She straightened his father's name patch on his coveralls. Just like fixing the plane, we each bring what we know to the table. And then we build something extraordinary. She smiled. After all, isn't that what engineers do? Outside, a crop duster roared down the runway, its familiar sound a reminder of everything that would stay the same, even as everything changed. Mike looked at the scattered newspapers, each one telling a version of his story. None of them had quite gotten it right, but maybe that was okay. The real story wasn't in the headlines. It was in the details, in the careful balance of old and new, in the unexpected connections that changed lives. All right, he said, picking up his father's toolbox. Let's go talk to some reporters. But I'm wearing my coveralls. Alexandra's laugh echoed through the hangar. I wouldn't have it any other way. The invitation lay on Mike's kitchen table, like an artifact from another world. Cream-colored cardstock with raised silver lettering announced Carter Aerospace Annual Innovation Gala. Below that, in Alexandra's distinctive handwriting, You're my guest of honor. No coveralls allowed. Mike adjusted his tie for the 100th time, wondering if the rental suit would pass muster at what the invitation described as the premier event in aerospace innovation. He'd insisted on paying for the suit himself, despite Alexandra's offer to have her personal shopper handle everything. His phone chimed with a text from her. Car arriving in 10. Don't be nervous. They're more afraid of you than you are of them. Somehow I doubt that, he muttered, but smiled at her attempt to lighten the mood. The car turned out to be a Rolls-Royce, its driver wearing a uniform nicer than Mike's rented suit. As they pulled away from his modest apartment, Mike thought about how much his life had changed in just a week. The press conference had gone viral, with tech blogs dubbing him the blue-collar genius and business magazines praising Alexandra's innovative approach to talent acquisition. They arrived at the Metropolitan Science Center, its modern glass, architecture glowing against the night sky. Alexandra waited at the entrance, wearing a gown that made Mike think of starlight. You clean up nice, Mr. Reynolds, she said, adjusting his tie with practiced hands. Ready to meet the tech world's finest? Do I have a choice? Always. Her eyes met his. But I need my chief engineer there when I announce our new atmospheric research initiative. Inside, the gala was a blur of expensive perfumes clicking, cameras and conversations about venture capital and market disruption. Mike felt like an anthropologist studying an exotic tribe, trying to decode their customs and language. Mitchell! Come meet Mike Reynolds, Alexandra called to a distinguished-looking man. Mike, this is Mitchell Chen, our head of R&D. Chen gave Mike an appraising look. Ah, the mechanic who revolutionized our power management systems. Tell me, what made you think of using military-grade capacitors in that configuration? For the first time that evening, Mike felt on solid ground. He launched into a technical explanation, drawing diagrams on a cocktail napkin. Soon, a small crowd of engineers had gathered, asking questions and debating specifications. He's a natural. Mike overheard someone say to Alexandra, Where did you really find him? Exactly where I said, she replied proudly. Sometimes the best innovations come from people who solve real problems, not just theoretical ones. The evening progressed, and Mike found himself gradually relaxing. These people might wear expensive clothes and talk about billion-dollar projects. But at their core, many of them were just engineers who loved solving problems. During dinner, Alexandra clinked her glass for attention. Tonight, we're not just celebrating innovation, we're redefining it. Our new Riverside Research Division represents a fusion of practical expertise and theoretical brilliance. She gestured to Mike. Our chief engineer embodies this approach. In 3 days, he solved a problem our best teams had struggled with for months. Not because he had better resources or more advanced degrees, but because he understood something fundamental. Sometimes the best solutions come from combining old wisdom with new technology. The crowd applauded, and Mike felt his face flush. Alexandra continued, outlining their plans for atmospheric research and sustainable aviation technology. The invitation card in his pocket suddenly felt like a passport to a new world, one where his practical knowledge was valued as highly as any advanced degree. Later, as they stood on the center's rooftop terrace watching the city lights, Alexandra asked, "So, survived your first gala?" "Barely," Mike chuckled, "though I think I accidentally agreed to give a lecture series on practical engineering solutions. I heard the university regents were quite impressed." She turned to face him. "You know, you belong in this world more than you think. You just bring a different perspective to it." Mike pulled out the invitation card, its silver lettering, catching the light. "My dad used to say that every tool has its purpose. Maybe that's true of people too. We all have our role to play." "Speaking of roles," Alexandra said, her expression turning serious, "the board wants to fast-track the Riverside expansion. We need to talk about the next phase." Below them, the city hummed with energy and possibility. Mike thought about his father's toolbox, now sitting in what would soon become one of the most advanced aerospace research facilities in the country. Two worlds, colliding and combining in ways he never could have imagined. "I'm ready," he said, and was surprised to realize he meant it. The business document had fallen from a visitor's briefcase during the morning's construction planning meeting. Its header read, "Project Phoenix, Strategic Acquisition of Rural Airfields," and it was marked with a date 3 months before the Gulfstream's emergency landing at Riverside. Mike sat in his office, still strange to think he had an office now, staring at the pages. The document detailed plans for acquiring small airports across the country, but Riverside was highlighted differently. A note in the margin read, "Priority acquisition, unique atmospheric conditions. Pursues existing talent, make this essential to Phase 2. They had been scouting him, studying him, long before the aircraft's emergency landing. The realization settled, like a cold weight in his stomach. His phone buzzed. "Alexandra, meeting with investors in 30 minutes. Need you there." He slipped the document into his father's toolbox, which now sat beside his desk, like a bridge between his past and present. The construction noise outside reminded him of how quickly things were changing. The new research hangar was already taking shape, its modern lines a stark contrast to the old facilities. "Mike," Tom appeared in the doorway, "you might want to see this." He followed Tom to the old hangar, where a team of contractors was removing panels from the wall. Behind them, they found old electrical conduits that weren't on any airport diagram. "Those aren't standard aviation cables," Mike said, examining the thick shielding. "No," Tom agreed. "They look military-grade, like something you'd use for classified research," Mike finished. "Dad never mentioned anything about military work here." "Maybe he couldn't," Tom lowered his voice. "I always wondered why he turned down those big airport jobs. Maybe he was already working on something more important." Mike's mind raced. The document in his toolbox suddenly seemed less threatening and more like a piece of a larger puzzle. He pulled out his phone to text Alexandra, then hesitated. The investors were already gathering in the new conference room when Mike arrived. Alexandra stood at the head of the table, commanding attention in a blue suit that matched the corporate logos on the presentation screens. "Mike, perfect timing," she said. "We were just discussing the historical data that made Riverside so attractive for atmospheric research." He studied her face, looking for signs of deception, but saw only the genuine enthusiasm he'd come to know over the past weeks. "Actually," he said carefully, "I have some questions about Project Phoenix." The room fell silent. Alexandra's expression flickered briefly before she recovered. "Perhaps we should discuss that privately after the meeting." "No," came a voice from the doorway. "I think we should discuss it now." James Henderson stood there, holding a folder identical to the one in Mike's toolbox. "It's time everyone understood what makes Riverside so special." Alexandra sighed, but nodded. "You're right. Mike deserves to know the whole story." She turned to the investors. "Ladies and gentlemen, if you'll excuse us, this may take a while." After they filed out, Alexandra closed the door and turned to Mike. "Your father wasn't just an excellent mechanic. He was part of a classified research program studying unusual atmospheric phenomena. Riverside's unique geographic location made it perfect for high-altitude experiments." "The military cables in the walls," Mike said. "Their monitoring equipment? Some of the most sophisticated ever designed," Henderson confirmed. "Your father maintained them for years, keeping them operational while hiding them in plain sight. So the emergency landing, the job offer, all of it was genuine," Alexandra interrupted. "But yes, we knew about you, about your skills. We needed someone who could not only handle the technical challenges, but who also had a connection to the original program. Someone who might have inherited their father's talent for keeping important secrets." Mike thought about his father's quiet dedication, his insistence on doing things the right way, his subtle lessons about responsibility and trust. "There's more," Alexandra said softly. "What we're studying isn't just about climate change. We're detecting phenomena that could revolutionize aviation, but we need help understanding them. We need someone who knows both the old systems and the new technology." "Someone like me," Mike said, finally understanding. "That's why you chose a mechanic instead of an engineer." "That's why we chose you," Henderson corrected. "Because you're both." The construction sounds outside seemed to fade as Mike processed this new reality. His father had been part of something extraordinary, and now he was being invited to continue that legacy, but on a scale he never imagined. The resignation letter sat unfinished on Mike's computer screen, cursor blinking accusingly after the words, "I hereby tender my—" He'd started and deleted it 5 times already, each version attempting to explain why he needed to walk away from the biggest opportunity of his life. The morning's revelations had shaken him more than he wanted to admit. His father's secret work, Alexandra's careful orchestration of their meeting, the hidden purpose of Riverside Airport. It all felt too big, too overwhelming. A knock at his office door made him quickly minimize the screen. Alexandra stood there, her usual confidence tempered by concern. "Can we talk?" she asked. "About which part?" Mike replied. "The part where you investigated me before we met, or the part where my father's whole career was classified?" She closed the door and sat down. "I understand you're angry." "I'm not angry. He struggled to find the right word. "I fix planes, Alexandra. That's what I do. Now you're telling me I'm part of some secret research program? You're more than just a mechanic, and you know it." She leaned forward. "What we're doing here could change aviation forever. Your father understood that. My father kept secrets from me my entire life. To protect you," she said softly, "and to protect the work that's more important now than ever." Before she could continue, Tom burst in without knocking. "Mike, we've got a problem. The old monitoring equipment is picking up readings like nothing we've ever seen." Mike instinctively reached for his toolbox, then stopped. "That's not my department anymore, is it? Better call in the corporate engineers." "Mike," Alexandra's voice held a note of warning. "Don't do this." But he was already moving, pulling up the resignation letter on his screen and turning the monitor toward her. "You know what's funny? I actually started writing this before Tom came in." Her face fell as she scanned the unfinished letter. "So that's it? You're just going to walk away? Isn't that better than being manipulated into staying?" "Nobody manipulated you into rebuilding that Gulf Stream," she shot back. Nobody manipulated you into developing a breakthrough power management system. That was all you. The monitoring equipment's alarm grew louder, its urgent beeping filling the tense silence between them. Tom shifted uncomfortably by the door. "Those readings are getting worse," he said. Mike looked between the resignation letter and his father's toolbox, feeling torn between anger and duty. Alexandra stood and faced him directly. "You want the whole truth? Fine. We didn't just choose you because of your father's connection. We chose you because you have something rare, the ability to see beyond conventional solutions. That's not manipulation, that's recognition." The alarm's pitch increased. Through the window, Mike could see strange atmospheric distortions forming. Above the runway, like heat waves but more structured. "What is that?" he asked, professional curiosity temporarily overriding his anger. "That," Alexandra said, "is why we need you. These phenomena are becoming more frequent, more intense. They affect aircraft in ways we don't fully understand. Your father helped develop the original monitoring system, but now we need someone who can bridge the gap between his old technology and our new methods." Mike's fingers hovered over the keyboard, one keystroke away from completing his resignation, but the engineer in him couldn't look away from the readings on the monitoring equipment. "The pattern," he muttered. "It's similar to the power fluctuations in the Gulf Stream." Alexandra nodded. "Now you're getting it. These atmospheric anomalies are affecting modern aircraft in ways the original researchers never anticipated. We need someone who understands both worlds." The resignation letter glowed on the screen, waiting for his decision. Outside, the strange distortions were growing more pronounced. Tom cleared his throat. "Mike, whatever you're going to do, we need to do something about those readings. They're stronger than anything in the historical data." Mike looked at his father's toolbox one more time, remembering all the lessons it represented. Not just about fixing planes, but about responsibility, about using your skills when they're needed most. He reached for the mouse, and Alexandra held her breath. With 3 quick clicks, he closed the resignation letter without saving. "Show me the historical data," he said. "All of it. If we're doing this, we're doing it right." Alexandra's relief was visible, but Mike held up a hand. "Don't celebrate yet. I'm not promising to stay. I'm just promising to solve this problem. After that, we talk. About everything. No more secrets." She nodded solemnly. "No more secrets." The alarm continued its urgent warning as they hurried toward the monitoring station, whatever was happening. In the skies above Riverside, it was about to push both old and new technology to their limits. The old business plan was buried deep in James Reynolds' files, its pages yellow with age. Mike found it while searching through his father's records for information about the atmospheric anomalies. The document was dated 20 years ago, and the letterhead bore a familiar name, Carter Industries. "Alexandra," he called out, not taking his eyes off the paper, "I think you need to see this." She hurried over from the monitoring station where she'd been analyzing data. The atmospheric disturbances had subsided, but they'd left behind a mystery that had kept them working through the night. "That's my father's company," she said, recognizing the letterhead. "Before I took over and rebranded it as Carter Aerospace." "Read page 3, Mike said quietly. Her eyes scanned the document, widening as she understood. "This is a proposal for a joint research program between Carter Industries and your father." He turned it down, Mike said, flipping to the last page, where his father's neat handwriting filled the margins. He wrote that the technology wasn't ready, that pushing too fast could be dangerous. "And my father didn't take that well," Alexandra finished, sinking into a chair. "I remember now. I was just a kid, but I remember him being angry about some small-town mechanic who'd derailed his plans." The monitoring equipment hummed quietly in the background as they absorbed this revelation. 20 years of history suddenly shifted into new perspective. "That's why you really came here, isn't it?" Mike asked. "To finish what your father started." Alexandra shook her head. "Not exactly. I came here to prove him wrong, to show that your father was right. She pulled out her tablet and opened a file. Look at these readings from the past decade. The phenomena are exactly what James Reynolds predicted would happen if we pushed atmospheric technology too quickly. Mike studied the graphs, recognizing patterns similar to what they'd seen in the Gulf Stream's power system. The aircraft modifications. We're an attempt to work with these anomalies rather than fight them, she finished. Just like your power reservoir solution. You instinctively understood what your father knew 20 years ago, that sometimes slower is better. Tom appeared with fresh coffee, taking in their serious expressions. Found something in the old man's files? Found our answers, Mike said, spreading out the documents. Dad wasn't just maintaining monitoring equipment, he was running his own research program, gathering data to prove his theories about atmospheric stability. And now those theories are proving correct, Alexandra added. These anomalies aren't just random phenomena, they're the atmosphere responding to decades of technological pressure. Every supersonic flight, every high-altitude test, every piece of space junk we've left up there, it's all contributing to a pattern your father predicted. Mike picked up his father's old business plan, its pages containing not just proposals, but warnings, carefully reasoned arguments for a more measured approach to atmospheric research. So where does that leave us? He asked. Alexandra stood and walked to the window, watching the dawn paint the sky in colors that seem somehow more significant now. It leaves us exactly where we need to be. Your father understood the problems, you understand the solutions, and I have the resources to make those solutions reality. She turned back to face him. I didn't manipulate you into this partnership. Mike, I sought you out because I genuinely believed you were the right person to help fix these problems. Finding out about our father's connection, that just confirms what I already knew. Mike looked at the old business plan, then at the modern monitoring equipment surrounding them. In the distance, construction crews were arriving to continue work on the new research facility. Dad always said every problem has a history, he mused, understanding that history is part of finding the solution. Smart man, Alexandra smiled. So, are we still a team? Mike stood and offered his hand. Partners. But this time with all the cards on the table. As they shook hands, Tom cleared his throat. Well, if we're done with the family history lesson, those atmospheric readings left us with some pretty interesting data to analyze. Mike and Alexandra shared a knowing look. The past might have brought them together, but it was the future that would truly test their partnership. Let's get to work, Mike said, carefully returning his father's business plan to its file. Some documents were worth keeping close. Not just for their historical value, but for their reminder that the best solutions often come from understanding what came before. The joint venture agreement looked different from typical corporate contracts. Instead of dense legal text, it included detailed technical specifications and hand-drawn diagrams. Mike and Alexandra had spent days crafting it together, combining her corporate expertise with his practical approach. Reynolds-Carter Atmospheric Research, Alexandra read from the cover page, has a nice ring to it. They sat in the newly completed research facility where old and new technologies merged seamlessly. The original monitoring equipment had been carefully integrated into state-of-the-art systems, creating something unique in the aviation world. Your lawyers are gonna hate this agreement, Mike said, pointing to a section he'd insisted on including. Especially the part about maintaining regular flight services for the local community. Let them hate it. This is about more than corporate interests. She traced the embossed logo they'd designed together, a stylized wing incorporating elements from both their father's original work. This is about doing things right. The first results from their combined research were already promising. Mike's power reservoir system, originally designed for the Gulf Stream, had proven adaptable to a wide range of aircraft. When combined with the atmospheric data from James Reynolds' monitoring equipment, it opened new possibilities for safe, high-altitude flight. Tom knocked and entered, carrying a tablet displaying the latest readings. You too might want to see this. The new sensors are picking up patterns we never could detect before. The data showed complex interactions between aircraft systems and atmospheric conditions, validating theories that both their fathers had only glimpsed. Mike's practical innovations, merged with Alexandra's advanced technology, were revealing secrets of the sky that neither could have discovered alone. We need to adjust the monitoring grid, Mike said, sketching a quick modification on his notepad. If we calibrate the old sensors to work in parallel with the new ones, we can create a three-dimensional map of the phenomena, Alexandra finished, already pulling up the relevant specifications on her tablet. They'd developed this easy synchronicity over the past weeks, each anticipating the other's thoughts. The door opened again, this time admitting a group of young engineers, the first team they'd hired together. Each had been chosen not just for their technical skills, but for their ability to appreciate both traditional aviation and cutting-edge aerospace technology. The test flight is ready, one reported. We've implemented the modifications you suggested. Mike and Alexandra shared a glance. This would be the first official flight test of their combined innovations, a practical demonstration of everything the agreement represented. Let's do it, Alexandra said, standing. She hesitated, then added, together? Mike picked up his father's toolbox, now complemented by some of the most advanced diagnostic equipment available. Together, they walked out to the runway where an aircraft waited, its systems modified according to their new designs. The morning sun caught the Reynolds-Carter logo on its tail, and for a moment Mike could almost imagine his father standing there, nodding in approval. The test pilot ran through his pre-flight checks while Mike and Alexandra monitored the readings. Everything they'd worked for came down to this moment, the proving of their theory that the best solutions came from combining wisdom with innovation. Ready? Alexandra asked, her hand hovering over the initiation sequence. Mike thought about the agreement waiting in the office, about the partnership it represented, not just between companies, but between approaches to problem-solving, between past and future, between two people who saw the same vision. Ready, he confirmed. The aircraft took off smoothly, its enhanced systems responding perfectly to the atmospheric conditions. As it climbed, the monitoring equipment showed exactly what they'd predicted, a harmonious interaction between machine and sky, achieved through the marriage of experience and innovation. Tom appeared beside them, watching the ascending aircraft. You know what your fathers would say about this? Mike and Alexandra answered in unison, that we did it right. The joint venture agreement might have been just paper and ink, but what it represented was flying overhead, proving that the best partnerships aren't just about combining resources, they're about combining perspectives, respecting history while embracing the future, and understanding that the most powerful innovations often come from unexpected collaborations. The ring wasn't fancy, a simple band of titanium salvaged from an old aircraft part, carefully shaped and polished in Mike's workshop during quiet evening hours. It represented everything about their relationship, unexpected, practical, and born from the union of old-world craftsmanship and modern precision. Mike turned it over in his hands as he sat in the hangar after hours. The test flight's success had marked a turning point for their partnership, but something else had been growing alongside their professional collaboration, something neither of them had planned for. I thought I'd find you here, Alexandra's voice echoed through the quiet space. She'd changed from her corporate attire into jeans and a Carter Aerospace polo shirt, looking more relaxed than she had in weeks. Just thinking, Mike replied, quickly pocketing the ring. She settled beside him on the workbench, their shoulders touching comfortably. About the test flight? About everything. How different things were just a few months ago. How one emergency, landing changed everything. Not just the landing, she said softly, the person who fixed it. Their eyes met, and Mike felt the same spark he'd experienced that first day, not just attraction, but recognition of a kindred spirit. Someone who understood the joy of solving impossible problems, of making things work when others said they couldn't. You know, Alexandra continued, when I first planned to acquire this airport, I thought I knew exactly how everything would unfold. The technical challenges, the business integration, all of it. But then reality had other plans, she laughed. Then I met someone who made me realize that the best plans are the ones that leave room for surprise. Mike fingered the ring in his pocket. He'd been carrying it for days, waiting for the right moment. Speaking of surprises. But Alexandra held up a hand. Wait, there's something I need to say first. She stood and walked to the Gulf Stream, now modified with their new systems. When I first landed here, I thought I was just following in my father's footsteps, trying to complete what he started. But I found something better, a true partnership in every sense. She turned back to face him, and Mike was struck by how her usual corporate confidence had been replaced by something more genuine, more vulnerable. "Mike Reynolds," she said, reaching into her own pocket. "Will you—" They both stopped, staring at each other in amazement. Because there, in Alexandra's hand, was a ring, different from the one in Mike's pocket, but equally meaningful. It was made from a piece of the original monitoring equipment, fashioned into a band that combined industrial utility with elegant design. For a moment, neither spoke. Then they both burst out laughing, the sound echoing through the hangar like a release of long-held tension. "Great minds think alike," Mike suggested, pulling out his ring. "Or fools seldom differ," Alexandra replied with a grin. Then her expression softened. "Although in this case, I prefer to think it's because we both understand something important." "What's that?" "That the best connections aren't about one person choosing another. They're about two people choosing to build something together." Mike stood and walked to join her by the aircraft that had brought them together. "Is that your way of saying yes?" "Only if that's your way of saying yes too." They exchanged rings there in the hangar, surrounded by the tools and technology that represented their shared passion. The simple bands fit perfectly, his ring on her finger, her ring on his, each one carrying the marks of their respective worlds while creating something new together. "You know what this means?" Alexandra asked, admiring how the titanium caught the evening light. "That Tom wins the office betting pool?" She laughed and leaned against him. "That we get to keep building our future together, exactly the way we started, by combining the best of both worlds." Above them, the monitoring equipment quietly tracked the atmospheric phenomena they'd learned to understand. Outside, the sun set on Riverside Airport, where crop dusters shared runway space with advanced research aircraft. And in the hangar where it all began, two people who had started as unlikely business partners discovered that the best proposals aren't always the ones you plan. They're the ones that grow naturally from shared vision, mutual respect, and the courage to let something extraordinary develop. The framed photograph hung in the center of the new Riverside Research Center's main lobby. It showed Mike and Alexandra standing in front of their modified Gulfstream 1 year ago, but it was the smaller photo beside it that always caught visitors' attention. A faded image of James Reynolds working on an aircraft, the same one that had inspired Mike's breakthrough. "Quite a year," Tom said, joining Mike as he adjusted the frame's alignment. "Your dad would have loved seeing this place now." The facility had evolved exactly as they'd promised. A unique blend of cutting-edge research and traditional aviation. Crop dusters still took off alongside experimental aircraft, and local pilots chatted with aerospace engineers in the coffee shop that had replaced the old break room. "Speaking of seeing things," Tom continued with a knowing smile, "you might want to check the approaching aircraft radar." Mike glanced at the display and grinned. The Gulfstream, their Gulfstream, was on final approach. Alexandra returning from a successful presentation to the National Aviation Research Board. He headed out to the runway, his father's toolbox, still accompanying him on every job. Some habits didn't need changing, even if the tools inside now included cutting-edge diagnostic equipment alongside the old wrenches. The aircraft touched down perfectly, its modified systems handling the landing with characteristic smoothness. Alexandra emerged looking triumphant, her wedding ring catching the sunlight as she waved. "They approved everything," she announced as she reached him. "Full funding for the next phase of atmospheric research, and they want us to establish 3 more facilities like Riverside. Let me guess, you already have the airports picked out?" "Small fields with good bones and better people," she confirmed, "just like this one." They walked together toward the research center, passing the wall of photographs that documented Riverside's transformation. The latest edition showed their first successful test flight, the aircraft's contrail drawing a perfect arc through the atmospheric phenomena they'd learned to predict and work with. "Emergency landing on runway 3, the radio crackled suddenly. "Corporate jet reporting electrical issues." Mike and Alexandra shared a knowing look. "Just like old times," she suggested. "Better page the chief engineer," he replied with a smile. But before they could respond, their team was already moving. Young engineers grabbed diagnostic equipment while veteran mechanics reached for traditional tools. In the new Riverside, there was no division between old and new approaches, only problems to solve and solutions to find. The incoming aircraft landed safely, taxiing to a stop in front of their hangar. Its pilot stepped out, looking worried, until he saw who was waiting to help. "Reynolds Carter Atmospheric Research," he read from the building sign. "Wait, are you the mechanic from that viral story? The one who fixed the Gulf Stream?" "That's ancient history," Mike said, already examining the jet's electrical system. "But you're in the right place. We specialize in solving impossible problems." Alexandra joined him in the inspection, her corporate authority balanced perfectly with hands-on expertise she'd developed over the past year. Together, they represented everything Riverside had become, a place where experience met innovation, where tradition and progress worked in harmony. As they diagnosed the problem, Mike caught sight of their reflection in the aircraft's polished surface. 1 year ago, they had been strangers from different worlds. Now, they moved in sync, finishing each other's sentences and anticipating each other's needs, their matching rings, subtle reminders of how much had changed. The repair was straightforward, a simple problem that they could now solve in their sleep, but they gave it the same attention they'd give to any job, because that's what James Reynolds had taught and what Riverside still stood for. Later, as the sun set behind the research center, Mike and Alexandra stood in front of the framed photographs. The image of their first meeting captured a moment of possibility. 2 people who had no idea they were about to change not just their own lives, but the future of aviation itself. "Ready for another year of impossible problems?" Alexandra asked, squeezing his hand. Mike thought about everything that had brought them to this moment: an emergency landing, a father's legacy, a titanium ring, and the courage to trust in unexpected possibilities. "With you, always." Above them, the atmospheric monitoring equipment tracked patterns in the darkening sky, while on the runway, aircraft of all types came and went. Riverside had become exactly what they dreamed of, a place where past and future met, where innovation respected tradition, and where love could bloom in the most unexpected circumstances. The framed photos watched over it all, reminding everyone who passed through that sometimes